Welcome. Today is the first day of Av, Rosh Chodesh Av, the first day of the month, and the 5th of August. We're looking at the second reading of Facade Devarim, and we're looking at Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 13. So, Moses says, and by the way, this reading begins with the word Eicha. Eicha is the Hebrew word for lament. It's not really for lament. It really means how. But it's a form of how which is like a lament. And the reason this happened is because the book of Lamentations, which we read on Tisha B'Av, begins with the word Eicha. 3 of the chapters there begin with Eicha, this word, how. And it's a sign of deep mourning. So, the week before, we always read the Parsha, Parashat Devarim, the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, the day on which we commemorate the destruction of the two temples. And so we have here this notion that it's connected by this word Eicha. So Moses is lamenting the fact that it's too hard to carry the burden of the Israelites. And so he says that he said to them, "Ready yourselves and appoint men who are wise, understanding, and known among your tribes for the reputations. And I will appoint them as your judges, your heads." And so the people answered to him, verse 14, "He answered me and said, the plan you have spoken is good for us. Let's do it." And then in verse 15, he says, "I took the heads of your tribes, I convinced the heads of your tribes, wise and known men, to become the judges." Now, I believe we've spoken about this before in different opportunities, but there's this issue here with what he asked for and what he received. He asked for people who are 3 things: wise, understanding, or perceptive, let's call it also, and known. Now, these are the 3 sfirot of the intellect, the 3 powers of the intellect: wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. So that's what he asked for. But he only found people that are wise and known, meaning that they only had the wisdom and the knowledge. What happened to the understanding? The understanding, on the face of it, he couldn't find. So there's a whole problem with this. How can you have somebody who doesn't have the full intellect to become a judge? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So Rashi explains what these 3 words mean. And it's very important to see the differences. And he quotes from the Talmud. And the Talmud says, what does it mean for a person to be wise, and what's the difference between being wise and being understanding, or let's call it perceptive? So he says a wise person is like a money exchanger. Whenever he's brought money to look at, meaning that somebody wants to change it into some other bills or some other currency, he has work to do. But if nobody brings him anything, he's sort of unoccupied. He sits and he wanders. His mind wanders. The understanding person, the person who's perceptive, is like a money exchanger who doesn't just sit in his little office waiting for people to come to him, but he goes out and he offers his money to people. He's looking for people to change their money for them. And so he always has work. And he says it like this, that even if nobody brings him money, he brings the money to the people. So, what is he trying to say? What's the idea here? The idea is that wisdom, we explain, means a person who is wise when he hears something said to him. That's what King Solomon said about wisdom, that the wise man is someone who can learn from anyone. Anything that he hears, any piece of knowledge that he gets, he speaks to someone. Somebody comes to him and says a sentence, whatever it is, he can immediately siphon off knowledge, wisdom from what was said. That's what it means to be wise. To recognize that every person can teach me something. So the wise person is a person who is open. He's like a sponge. He's waiting for something to come his way. And the moment that it comes his way, he takes it apart, like the money exchanger. He takes it apart and he extracts from it the core. That is a person who's wise. We connect this in Hasidic thought to what we call the power of self-nullification. To be able to hear wisdom from anyone, you have to have a sense of self-nullification, which puts you in an open state to hear whatever someone might want from you. Whatever someone is giving you, you're waiting to hear it. You're like a sponge ready to accept it. You don't feel yourself. You have no animosity towards them. You don't have any criticism of what they're saying. That's not the time. Maybe later you'll criticize. But right now you're just there to soak it all up. The person who has understanding, Rashi explains here, is someone who, even if nobody comes to them, they go around looking for things to work on. In other words, that even if there's nobody around, they will take what they've learned already. They would take perhaps what in their wisdom they grabbed, they soaked up from someone else, and they will now take it apart and try to understand it to the best of their ability. Now, the thing is that there are two types of understanding. There's two very different types of understanding. And one of the best examples of this is we've spoken in the past about what we call the Torah Academy. And the Torah Academy is basically one of the most important models that Rav Ginsburg has developed, which takes the Sfirot, in this case 11 Sfirot, because he adds Dat also, and it corresponds them to the various areas of human knowledge. So, in this model, I'll start from wisdom, because that's what we're dealing with. So, mathematics is wisdom. And understanding is the exact sciences. What's in the exact sciences? The exact sciences are, first and foremost, physics, but then we have chemistry, and biology also. And biology divides into many subtopics. Chemistry does also, but in principle, all of chemistry is pretty much the same. But in biology, you find things that are very, very different from one another, and we'll say something in a moment. So, what's the thing here? The point here is that the exact sciences are not all equal. Physics is very different from biology. It's true that if you want biology, any science, to be rigorous, you have to base it on mathematics the way that physics bases itself on mathematics. However, biology doesn't do that so much. It does to some extent, but not really that much. But there are areas of biology that are completely not even based on mathematics, they're based on something else. And in fact, when you apply mathematical rigor to them, they usually fall apart. They can't really stand properly. One of these areas is evolutionary science, or whatever they call it, the science, but it's more evolutionary imagination. It's based on imagination. It's a way of looking at the world that assumes that because our natural tendency is to see nature going from the simple to the complex, that's how life was created, that's how life developed, and so on. It doesn't stand up to mathematics very well, because the moment that you apply mathematical rigor trying to understand, so how exactly do these changes in the, let's say it's really based on genetics that we're not even sure of. It's still the central doctrine, but we're not sure that it's really based on genetics, these changes. But let's say that they are for a moment. How long would it take for changes that would cause speciation, meaning division into species, to occur? How long would it take? And when we try to apply mathematical models to this, like cladistics, which is a study of distance, genetic distance, it's a very rigorous mathematical discipline that's related to information theory. When we try to apply this to evolution, everything falls apart, because the amount of time you would need is infinitely long. These changes don't happen randomly, or even by the effect of what's called natural selection or so on. There's just not enough time in the history of the universe for these changes to actually happen, all the more so if you believe that the world is not even that old. Then there's no time for this speciation to actually happen. And so it really falls apart. But it is based on something. It's based on what you could call is a rigorous evolutionary type of thinking in the human mind that says things develop from the simple to the complex. But what it can't do what physics has been able to do, which is to truly predict the finding of certain things that are amazing. For instance, the bending of light around a gravitational well. In this case, it was the 13 or 14 eclipse that was viewed and vindicated at least part of what Einstein had developed, that light would bend around the sun, and it was actually seen. The finding of gravitational waves, which only happened in the last decade or two, which was also predicted by Einstein and was found to be true. So there's this amazing thing in physics that physicists are able to not just look at what they see, they're able to see what's hiding behind what they see. They're able to predict things that cannot be seen at the moment. This is a higher level of understanding. So there's two levels of understanding. One level of understanding is like law to a certain degree. Law says, okay, there's a certain set of rules, let's apply it to the case that comes in front of us. And to be a judge, you have to have understanding at that level. If you don't understand how to apply the law, that's not the same thing as wisdom. To study the law is maybe wisdom, but to apply it, that already requires understanding. If you can't do that, you can't be a judge. So they certainly had that. When the Torah says that Moses couldn't find people who had perception, depth of their understanding, what it means to say is that they weren't able to understand what's lying behind the case that's being brought to them. There's a story behind this. There are people behind it. Where this really comes out is not just in law, is for instance in psychology. You can know all the theories if you don't know how to analyze the person that's coming to you and sense what's behind the story that they're telling you. If you can't understand people at a depth of perception, then you can't really help them. And it's not just about understanding them, it's also even understanding timing, knowing when to give the advice that you want to give. Sometimes you know exactly what the person needs to do, you've understood them properly, but you give them advice at the wrong time, they can't use it, and they end up just going back to their misery, and you haven't helped them at all. So perception, the depth of understanding, is the same type of thing of a physicist understanding what's lying behind the laws that I've already found, or the phenomena that I've already seen. What's hiding behind it? What's the mathematical rule behind these things? To get that is to understand is to have deep perception of reality. To understand the human soul is to have a deep perception of the person in front of me. And that they lacked. They weren't able to give that to the cases that they were trying. And so the Torah mentions or describes it as if they didn't have understanding. They didn't have this ability to perceive the depth. The Torah calls this, and Rashi gave us this definition back when we were in Parshat Jethro, when he brought up this idea of appointing judges in addition to Moses. There Rashi told us that this ability to perceive that which is behind is called Mevin Davar Mitoch Davar, one who can understand something from something. In other words, they can see what's behind the facade. They can see what's behind the revealed phenomena. It's called Davar Mitoch Davar. The amazing thing is that this phrase, Mevin Davar Mitoch Davar, or just Davar Mitoch Davar, that's just these three words, is equal to the filling of the word Mashiach. Mashiach is the person that we're waiting for, who can look at every individual and understand the story behind the story. he can look at world events and understand the story behind the phenomena, the story behind the news, what's really going on. Because he can understand that, he can bring people to a much better place, and what we're waiting for him to do is to bring the world to an era of peace, era of goodwill, and it starts by being a person who has perception. The Mashiach is the one who sees the davar mitoch davar. He sees something behind everything that he sees. The ultimate example of this is, as it says explained in Hasidic thought, is being able to see the godliness behind the physical nature of the world. That is the ultimate perception. So a scientist may be able to see the mathematics behind the phenomena. The Mashiach sees the godliness within the story. He sees the meaning, the divine meaning revealing itself through the news, through the facade of the external phenomena. So with this we end today. Thanks for joining. I hope to see you tomorrow.